Right folks, we're going to look at 15 markers now, and we are going to focus on class, gender, ethnicity. You might even get a question on the relationship between masculinity, could be on there, so we can discuss what you'd get if you get a question on masculinity as well, with a slightly different focus. Now, these areas, remember, it's 15 marks, so what you need 3 different potential explanations here per paragraph. I think there's a lot more that you could come up with, but we're going to aim for 3 at a minimum. 4 if you've got an extra like minute or 2 minutes at the end, but 3 well explained should be enough to get you 15 out of 15. Okay, when we look at things like gender, remember your 3 explanations. When you see gender, you will, I think, immediately go to kind of feminism. Or I'll put masculinity over here because we can separate these 2 out. They're not quite the same question. So if you've got gender, straight away in your mind you should have gone to feminism and youth culture. If you've gone to feminism and youth culture, you'll probably find that you can divide it into 2 areas. What I might call the response to the patriarchy, and then resistance to patriarchy. Now, you'll note that the writers from within those sections are going to be different. So the response to the patriarchy is going to be girls being stuck at home and restricted. They face higher levels of social control, according to Smart, and therefore end up maybe in bedroom culture, McRobbie and Garber. Now, just as a point, these are not revision videos. These should be done after the revision's finished. So you need to know, Carol Smart says, high levels of social control from parents. That's more restrictive behaviour for girls than it is boys. It means that they're going to be restricted in terms of their freedoms to leave the house, and therefore they end up in bedroom culture, McRobbie and Garber, where they do 3 things, which is hair and makeup, gossip about boys, and read Jackie magazine. Like, it should be that quick. Like, these are that's the content that you should know. So there's one idea straight away, and note what I've given you is the starting point for that paragraph. The relationship between gender and membership of youth cultures is some youth cultures are forming as a response to patriarchal oppression of women. We can see Smart, McRobbie and Garber. However, we've got the rest of feminism talking about the response, not just the response, sorry, resistance to the patriarchy. So then you're looking at groups like New Wave, studied by Blackman. You're looking at a group like Ladette's, studied by Jackson, and you're looking at girl gangs. And the girl gang writers you want to be looking for are New York Girl Gangs by Campbell and Martin Denscombe looking at East Midlands girl gangs. Why those 3? Because all of these say that what's going on is gender convergence, and obviously their response is to the patriarchy. We're in the 1980s onwards, and therefore it's a form of resistance. So that's what's going on at the start here for your first couple of paragraphs. But there are alternative potential ideas that you could give. It's not just 2 paragraphs is not going to cut it. So what could you do for your 3rd paragraph here on gender? Well, there are lots and lots that you could talk about in relation to males and masculinity. Okay, so you've got Clark and the skinheads writing from a Marxist position from the CCCS. It's all about exaggerating working class masculine values. So they exaggerate masculinity. And what's the reason they do that? Again, it's resistance, but because this is Marxist, it's resistance to capitalism. So a quick paragraph there that you could throw in Clark from the CCCS. You could talk about some of your other writers from the CCCS, because as soon as you've mentioned resistance to capitalism, they become applicable as well. There is a secret, hidden kind of theory that you might use potentially as a 4th paragraph, which could be that Cage is irrelevant, and that is a postmodern paragraph, okay? Where you talk about Cage not mattering, Bennett and Hetherington, because we live in a fragmented society, and therefore the relationship is one that is completely not needed, not important, because we are joining not youth cultures now, or youth subcultures, but we're joining neo-tribes. A study by Bennett and Ravers is the example. So bang, 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 bang. You've got 4 ideas here. And note That Cage is a relevant paragraph. That one here works for class, works for ethnicity as well. It's not the best paragraph, I think, to use, but it does work. It does work for them. So, the thing that we said at the top of the board, though, is that you could get a question on masculinity, and that's a bit of a strange one, because as soon as you get a question on masculinity, you're like, well, I can't use feminism now because they're just talking about females. Well, I would agree with you, because you can't talk about feminine youth cultures like bedroom culture. That doesn't count, because that's got nothing to do with masculinity. But you're not telling me that resistance to the patriarchy and this example here of gender convergence, where we see girls behaving in a macho and masculine way as a response to the patriarchy and subverting the traditional gender norms within either education or within the wider world, you're not telling me that masculinity is not important there. Of course it's important. It's just that they are kind of displaying masculinity in the same way as men. So that paragraph still works. However, the point that you're going to make is going to be different. You can't start that paragraph in the same way you would here by saying, here you might say, well, the membership between gender and membership of youth culture is based on resistance to the patriarchy. This is where girl gangs formed, such as Anne Campbell, blah, 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 where they did this, this and this. You'd have to start by saying, female subcultures have a relationship to masculinity, and they do so when they resist the patriarchy by taking part in gender convergence, where the blurring of the roles is apparent between men and women, and we can see this in, and then you bring in the ladettes and the girl gangs. So those will also work for a potential paragraph on masculinity as well. Now, what can we do for our first paragraph? Well, although I know the advanced information for what year is it, 2022, says that you won't get asked a question potentially on education and anti-school subcultures there, you can always use the crisis of masculinity by Mack and Gale. And his study in education, where particularly looks at the macho lads. Not hard to remember, because how many times the word masculinity or macho appearing up here. What Mack and Gale is going to say is that there's a crisis of masculinity. We know why this happens. This is an identity crisis in men, where the job market's become more feminised, where the traditional factory jobs have gone, where education becomes more important because the job roles are now feminine based, like answering the phone, typing, which were traditionally secretarial jobs. As a response to this, Mack and Gale finds that groups and subcultures in school exist who are reacting to that. And the macho lads is the group that he says appear because of this. They're disruptive. They are, playing on these masculine stereotypes and potentially behaving in an anti-school kind of way and not really achieving. And Mack and Gale puts that group down to the crisis of masculinity. They are working class macho lads, remember. So, same stuff, same content almost, just written in a slightly different way for a question on masculinity. There are other ones that you could choose, I suppose Sewell's Black Boys in School, the rebel young lads displaying masculinity, such as like Yardie gang member style. They're doing that as well. So all of those kind of fit, but for me, those would be the most likely to work for that particular 15 marker. When we move on to class, remember we've already got a kind of backup fourth paragraph here from postmodernism. I'm hoping when you hear about class straight away, you go Marxism and you go resistance again. Resistance to capitalism from the working class lads in their subcultures, according to the CCCS, Brake, Hall and Jefferson, Clark, Corrigan, they all become applicable. For me, in the exam, Mike Brake and Clark are very good ones to put in a 15 marker, because you can really expand upon what they say, and you've got a very specific youth subculture that they look at, i.e. for Clark, the skinheads. So hopefully you went Marxism straight away. Here's your next ones where you're like, well, what else can I use here for class, Dan? Well, there's a few other examples. You could go functionalism, and you could go to Cohen, Albert Cohen, remember, and his idea of status frustration. That, again, is class orientated, because the working class lads in school fail to achieve, they're culturally deprived compared to the other kids, and consequently low status means that they go and get status from delinquent acts with their little peer kind of youth subculture group. Class is important there for Cohen. Also, from a functions perspective, there's Miller and the working class lads' focal concerns. Different set of norms and values, which meant trouble was inevitable for these guys on a night out. Smartness, toughness, trouble, autonomy, fate, excitement, all of those focal concerns that we've looked at and talked about. I suppose, both of those could be individual paragraphs, but you could put them both together also because they are functionalist to some degree. I suppose if you wanted to look at maybe middle class subcultures, you could look at Goths. They kind of join to share feelings of angst. Feelings of angst, feelings of depression, sharing an interest in art and literature, according to Hodkinson, meaning that they're a subculture that are passive and non-aggressive, meaning they're a subculture that does well in education and go on to professional jobs, but also being a subculture where you're all in the same class, but you're in that subculture for life. Goths, goth for life, so there's a lot of longevity there for Goths, which might be interesting to talk about. So when you take a look at class now, it's much more than just Marxism. You've got Marxism, you've got your functionalists, you've got your Goths, your middle class, you've got postmodernism, with classes irrelevant in a neo-triad, such as the Ravers. When we move on to ethnicity, you are going to need to know the ethnicity booklet, you are going to need to know some of the studies from the ethnicity handout. For me, we can kind of break down, and I think a postmodern paragraph would work here, but there's a few examples of what you might want to talk about. You could do Hebdige and Savanadan, who look at racism as the cause for youth culture. They talk about colonialism's impact, according to Savanadan, and Hebdige saying that all youth cultures are a form of resistance. And I suppose Gilroy as well, they all look at Rasta as a group that formed to kind of resist the white racism that they're facing, but also the kind of colonial spirit of white oppression, as well as, according to Gilroy, the kind of oppression of them as a working class group as well. So you end up with Rasta, with symbols of cultural resistance like dreadlocks, like the colours, like weed. They form as a direct result of racism, colonialism and oppression. You've got Johal, who you might remember, Brasian, a hybrid culture. And Brasian, remember, they don't want full assimilation. They don't want to be fully these British, these British-born Asians, sometimes second or third generation. They don't want full assimilation into being quote-unquote British. They don't want to give up their heritage and the heritage of their parents and grandparents. So they keep hold of it. They form a hybrid culture where they infuse elements of British culture with things like Bhangra that become very popular, according to Bennett, in the 90s and in the noughties. You can see Corner Shop, Roomful of Asha, famous song, which has got kind of a lot of Punjabi references and Bollywood references to Asha Bosley, who's a famous Bollywood singer, hence the song Roomful of Asha. So we can see that, But again, this is a response to racism. This is a desire not to fully assimilate. This is one of the reasons that these groups are forming. When it comes to ethnicity, there's also racism in school. And you've got Tony Sewell with racism in school. Remember, this is Citygate Comp in London, where reasonably affluent area, but the kids are bussed in from a working class area, and the black lads face overt teacher racism and marginalisation. They're not encouraged, they're not kind of promoted academically, they're treated in a sort of second class citizen way, and therefore 18% of them join what Sewell calls the rebel group. Now the rebel group, remember, failure was a badge of honour, so they were aggressive and confrontational, and what they wanted is they wanted to become yardy kind of gangsters outside of school. Now this is in the 90s, so it's some time ago, remember, but racism in school from teachers. Plus you've got your postmodern paragraph. So technically on the board, I know it's only got 3 questions there, but we've just done 4 15 markers. Some of the content overlaps, but what you'll notice again is key, is we've discussed what your opening sentence has got to be, what the explanation is, you need to give that, and then the rest of the paragraph is shaped around that point as you give your writer and explain what they say.